So these are actually mugshots of my team back at Right Half. The company we started was called righthalf.com back in December '99, and most of these are actually Bombay students at the time. The way we hired was we went to the lab and said, "Chalo hamare saath," and they didn't know where are you taking me? Oh, you're going to work for us, write some code. That's a lot of actually got built that way, at the coffee shack, at the software lab, and so on. And we took mugshots of everybody as if they were coming to jail. So the thing that is very unique to, I think, students from institutes is, and there's the exuberance of youth and the whole feeling that nothing is impossible, the world is not. Quite unique. It's a lot of energy that an idealism, as Roshan calls it, which is the fuel to the activities in an incubator or an entrepreneurship environment. The other thing that's taught to us students in good institutes is don't take anything for granted and you question it. And I think that's also an essential ingredient to with an original idea. And thirdly, I think what's end up doing, do a bunch of activities where on campus, these are activities that are not business related, but it could be a cultural, it could be a play that you do together, it could be a technology event that you started together, it could be an entrepreneurship. And a little success there can go a long way in actually uniting people. Success is, I think, a big unifier. Even small successes help bring people together and they want to do it all over again. So for us, a few people who organized and started this festival called Tech Fest. And through Tech Fest, there was a bunch of activities that had happened. Entrepreneurship contest, the eCell, some of those were affiliated with Tech Fest. Now they're officially affiliated, but at the time it was starting, a lot of these things were starting together. So those were some of the seeds into let's come together and start a company. And I think every institute has where the guys who are most likely to be entrepreneurs are sharing successes every day on campus. And the fourth thing is, see, we all realize our responsibilities when we go out in the real world. In the college environment, although we do have responsibilities outside, so the feeling for good or for bad is you have lesser to lose. Even if you actually have a lot to lose, you feel like it's as small or big a decision as going and doing some extracurricular activity. Now, once you graduate, this is experiences as a student becoming an entrepreneur. Once the reality hits and you have to cope with that, I think there is a lot of that, nothing to lose element. So that's how I would characterize the bunch at the time, quite honestly, that started Right Half. That's Professor Phatak there at the corner. These are the three founders of Right Half. On Jan 30th, 2000. This is a conference room in the city. Rakesh Mathur and Nandan Nilekani, the two alumni from IIT, were part of the meeting. And this is where the agenda was to decide what to do with these guys who start a company as students. What happened that day was, if I could, one day when that was the day when I guess Patak formally decided that we will have an incubator, and we formally decided that we would have a company that would be supported by the incubator. We became entrepreneurs really, and it's the one-way road. I think the path to becoming an entrepreneur is a one-way road. That's the day we were on that road. And the other would like to be an institution to be comfortable with being a stakeholder in a making entity is something that I think was born then. So I don't know if everyone can see, but that patch on the ceiling on the right is champagne in the third office of IIT Business. First we were in the math department, a little room. Then we moved to a bigger room in the math department. We moved to the physics department and got a much bigger space. So the day we launched coconut and the champagne. The point here is early successes in any new initiative, whether it's a new incubator, a new startup. For the incubator, I think successes about April 2000 is a lot of media interest in the incubator, which helped spread the word about this initiative, student support startups with alumni and institute involved. We launched our beta product into a test market. We transitioned out of the incubator, which is actually a milestone both for the incubator, where we outgrew the little space of the incubator and went out in the real world. It happened in the middle of 2000. And many companies got added to the incubator, ideas going in. These are the team members actually sleeping in the office. We used to pretty much spend 24 hours a day there, maybe restroom breaks in between. Some of the values of the incubator, which I think have stuck on since the first day, are I think wealth creation in India. I'll talk more about this in the next slide, where I would say my personal anecdote, and probably there are more people like me, but wealth creation in India was something that was at the core. All the ideas that made it to the incubator and even till date, I think, are ideas which and they are based on innovation of some disruptive nature. Even today, all the companies in the incubator won't have your traditional bread and butter ideas. There would be an element of innovation to it and a new product idea to it. Not a lot of services companies. If there are services companies, IP would be at the core. So I think that's another ideology that has stuck with the incubator, and I think that's a great thing. Yeah, a lot of companies which are focusing on global markets, from day one. A lot of companies focusing on technology disruption. And I think another ideology was, as a technology institute, there is the business of technology which was not being fulfilled as much. And with the incubator, the business of technology is something that IIT would be deliberating about through the incubator. So lastly, just want to share some personal experiences about how this has transformed me. So to introduce myself a little bit, actually, so I graduated from IIT Bombay with a bachelor's in computer science in 2000, and started Right Half with some batchmates in my final semester, so 6 months before I graduated. And then about a year after graduation, we sold Right Half to a private company in the Silicon Valley, California. And then I was in the US for 7 years after that, and I recently moved back from the US 6 months ago to start a company back in India, an Indian company focusing on Indian consumers, etc. So I think what the incubator, the incubator definitely played the biggest role in defining me as an Indian entrepreneur. Without the incubator, I remember, back before starting the company, the next best idea for me was to go work for a Silicon Valley startup. And I was pretty focused on that. I got some opportunities there as well. I think if the incubator had not come my way, and the investors or alumni who participated through the incubator and invested in the company, I would have gone to the Silicon Valley like I did. But I think the bug that stuck with me because of the incubator was to come back and start a company in India. So the Indian entrepreneur bug was definitely something, I think the incubator planted. So it made a big, whether I become successful in it or not, or whether I stick to it or not, only time will tell. But that is something that made a big impact on me, and I would like to believe there are many people like me who are business minded or entrepreneurship minded who would otherwise end up outside of India, but through this setup can, it's a real opportunity for them to make an impact in India. And I wouldn't consider myself particularly nationalistic or patriotic. I think it's a pretty practical thing that, if you have an entrepreneur outside of campus, I believe is more respected in Silicon Valley than in India. And I think the incubator goes a certain distance in countering that and sort of certifying the validity of this aspiration of starting a new idea, and not going for a job or going to study abroad and the traditional path of an IITian. The second thing which really stuck with me was, I think, the business values that became part of me for life because of the type of people who were involved with righthalf.com. So our primarily, our lead investor, so Rakesh Mathur, who's a IIT Bombay batch of 78, graduating batch of 78 alumnus. He was the angel investor in Right Half, and he he's a seasoned entrepreneur. He made his money. He's a great investor, and him being on the board of directors and being sort of our mentor was a pretty significant thing. I mean, some things that we learned, in the time we spent together was, I think, the value of put the company ahead of yourself, or protect your company, not your job. That is something, which I learned because of him. I think he was very, people used to actually taunt him for betting on a bunch of kids, and we used to behave like kids also. And it's a very high risk investment. But he always treated us like business people. He would never preach to us, or he would never, patronize us. He would always treat us as, the shareholders in the company that we were, I mean, that I think went a long way in inculcating a similar value. So his advice used to be, if you're doing something for the first time, you are going to make mistakes, and if you make mistakes, one thing to do is to try and minimize mistakes, and the other option is to make new mistakes every time. So you maximize new mistakes. So his thing was, in a startup where all you have is your agility. If any idea makes sense, 10 others are doing it. You don't try to slow yourself down to try and minimize mistakes. You try and make newer mistakes every time. If you repeat mistakes, it's a problem. But you actually try to maximize new mistakes. That means you're moving pretty fast. So that is also something, these are words, but these are things that become part of you. And I think it was, if I had to do it any other way, I would still start a company, with Rakesh on the board and with Professor Phatak by my side, because of the business values that have stuck with me since then. The biggest thing I think I learned as an entrepreneur back then was what I need to learn to be a good businessman. And we made lots of mistakes, and we learned the hard way. We weren't particularly successful, I would say. We got a good exit. We have a good story to tell. But it didn't make us millionaires, for example. It didn't affect the lives of 1 million consumers, for example. It didn't create $1 million of wealth for the world, or $100 million.
Curious to listen how much you made it.
Right. So the most valuable asset was actually the list of things that we need to learn to become good businessmen. Lastly, I think the IIT Bombay incubator is a legacy now, I would like to believe. And I'd be lying if I said, being associated with that legacy and using that brand has not helped me in life. So that is also something that I've taken away from the experience. So that's basically my story, as a member of the first team of IIT Incubator. So from becoming an entrepreneur from a student, I think the biggest learning was, the difference between theory and practice. When we're put into situations where, decisions about people, decisions about money, decisions about business are involved, we end up making decisions that are based on instinct and not theory. And we all do that in high stress situations. We follow our instinct. Now, instinct is something, there's a nature part of it, and there is a big part of it which is experience. So as students, we would discount, the 10 years experience McKinsey guy who's saying all that, or, those gray-haired CEOs doing stuff, because it's all about, we can think the same way. What they're saying is they're stating the obvious. There's nothing insightful particularly. As a student, we would think that way, about what they're saying, and we have the energy and passion and the ability to move faster and stuff. But I think the biggest takeaway was that experience, inherently contributes to instincts, which result in making good business decisions. So nothing can replace experience. And to answer your question, sir, I think what I would expect from an incubator within an institute is to hold students to more brutal real-world standards. It's still a protected environment. It still feels like, if you fail a course, you're still there in the hostel and you're still there in the department, and they accept you and they pat your back and say you failed. It's not that way in the real world. It's way more brutal than that. And people are not as forgiving as people in educational institutes are. So I think the incubator to some extent protects you. Yes, so right half of the brain is the creative side. So our business was about creative ideas and creative people. So creative people could express their original ideas through our website and reach an audience. That was the premise of the business. So right half of the mind was